Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. You see I have a lot of baits laid out here. We're going to cover them all today. Basically when they're effective and when you need to start throwing them, how you can, obviously start to fish a little faster and catch more fish. That's what it's all about. We're getting out of that super slow winter fishing that's painful into the fun fishing. So we're going to jump right into it and break all this stuff down. Let's go. Alright, so today is going to be a pretty straightforward video. I have a lot of baits here on the table as you see, but we're going to talk about as these bass kind of get out of the depths of a cold winter waters, very sluggish, they start to get some energy, how can you target them? Well, I went out yesterday and the bass are still in the phase where they're pretty sluggish, but what I was having success with was pretty much, a jig, so still that slow water bait, whatever you want to fish, and I was adding a swim bait to the end of it and kind of hopping it like not a full blown out swim jig, but kind of a mixture of a yo-yo technique that I like to, swim it for a little bit and then stop it, swim it for a little bit and stop it. It's more as the water warms, you can fish a little faster, and I'd say the magic number on when you can start throwing most of these techniques is when the water gets above 50 degrees. Most of these are effective. So, you can't full out swim it yet, certainly if you're right on the verge of that 50 degree mark, but it's definitely an effective way to start off. And then as those temperature goes up, 51, 52 is a real magic number. A lot of people say 52 degrees, start throwing reaction strike baits. So reaction strike baits to me are something as simple as a spinnerbait. The positive to these are those bass are going to be hanging out on ledges. Depending on the depths of your lakes and what is considered a mid-depth is what I like to refer to it as. So like if the deepest point in the lake where the bass get to is about 20 foot and they're not on their beds yet, so I target anywhere from 5 to 7 feet. It might be they're just hanging out on those outside ledges before they move up. That's where the big females will be. So spinnerbaits, slow rolling one. You're not fishing shallow water spinnerbaits. Or you're not fishing shallow with your spinnerbait. So slow roll it. Find them somewhere suspended on that ledge in that range of 5 to 7 foot. Can be really effective. That's actually how I caught one of the fish I caught yesterday. But like I said, we're still not into full blown out spring weather yet, so it's going to be pretty tough. You gotta discipline yourself to slow your presentation down. That's very hard for me to do, is to slow down and discipline myself. I'm thinking like, all right, I'm trying to cover all this water. Certainly if I'm fishing from the bank, I'm like, I need to cover this. I need to hit that spot, that spot, that spot, and I'm ripping them too fast. I'm retrieving too fast, and you're not going to get down to that depth with the spinnerbait. You can fish the swim jig yo-yo effect, like I said, and that's definitely effective. Now, where it's good to one positive that squarebills, which is what I'm going to get into next. Squarebills are really effective in this time period as those bass are hanging out in that 5 to 7 foot range, like I said, because that's what most squarebills are, anywhere between 4 to 7, depending on the size. Some go a little deeper. Certainly, if you're throwing a Magnum squarebill, it goes to about 8. But squarebills can be really effective during this time. One of the best things, and a lot of people will say, is use a crawfish-colored squarebill. The bass are coming up to them basically, so it's something they find when they hit those water ranges, I guess is the correct way to put it. One tip with these squarebills is I'm not a fan of one brand or anything like that. I have all kind of brands laying over here on the table. But one thing to consider is if the water's muddy, so during this point of the year in a lot of places during the winter to spring transition, you get a lot of rain. Your lakes are muddied up. They're real murky. And so one way to combat that is fishing a squarebill with a rattle in it. So this one is kind of this is kind of a decent bait for that. It's kind of a hybrid. I would say go with something like this one here. This one has a little bit bigger bill on it, so you're gonna get into that deeper water. Got a real good rattle on it. One thing to note is with most general baits, the darker the water, the brighter, the darker the lure. And then if you're fishing clear water, you know, you might not need the rattle. You might go with the silent crank, like this one here. Silent crank in more natural colors. So this is like a white and a blue. Nothing too, you know, that if you're fishing clear water, you know, the fish can track it easier. They can see it better. But if you're fishing dark stained water, you know, something like this that has a nice rattle in it. I don't know how well you can hear that. Is a great bait. And then, you know, you got some of your shad baits. That's what a lot of the times the fish are going to start heavily feeding back now on shad. They're gonna be a little bit more active, and they'll chase bait fish. So shad cranks are a killer this time of year. Shad and crawfish cranks. But a lot of the times you're trying to trigger that reaction strike, and that's what a lot of people talk about. Is that bass aren't going to be super active during this time. You're just looking for a reaction strike. So one way I like to trigger that is when I'm fishing, I'll just be a consistent, you know, consistent retrieve on my crankbait, and then I'll just kind of twitch it, you know, do a little jerk, or even a pause in your retrieve. And something about that, bass just see that stop or that quick flutter, and then they react to it. It's you know, there's no like, it's not like I'm ever like, all right, I'm gonna throw out here every 15 feet roughly, I'm gonna jerk it and pause it. It's kind of, I just go up there and I cast it and mess around with it. If I know I'm throwing past some structure, or if I know it's down there, I'll try to do one of those reaction strikes techniques in those zones. But there's no like set method, like throw, you know, three jerks and then, you know, reel it in a few feet or whatever. There's no real technique to it, in my opinion. Don't get too caught up with that. That's just one little tip that I've probably spent too much time on here. But another good bait, once you get to when the water starts rising and you can start fishing lures more consistently, retrieve, you don't have to slow roll them. You can add a little bit of speed, which in return adds to where you can cover more water. And that's the fun part about this fishing, is you get to cover a little bit more water than you did in the spring, during the winter, where you had to fish real slow and it was painful. You can start throwing things like this is an underspin, and you can really cover some water with that. Also chatterbaits, like I said, depending on the water clarity, throw a darker, or you know, you're just trying to, let me get into water displacement. That'll help kind of go with this theory. Water displacement is basically when the water's so muddy and the bass can't see very well, they use their lateral lines to feel what is around them. So they don't technically see it, it might not catch their eye, but if a bait is vibrating a lot or making a rattle, they sense that with their lateral lines. I'm not a scientist or anything. That's just, you know, I've read up on this stuff and putting it to the best of my, you know, the best terms I can put it in. So something that displaces a lot of water will be more effective in this super muddy water when you get heavy rains and your lakes turn to chocolate milk. These baits, like, you know, chatterbaits, spinnerbaits with, you know, you might go with a Colorado blade versus a willow, depending on how much, you know, what the clarity of the water is. That's really key in this time of year. As the water warms a little bit, this is kind of progression that I'm trying to lay out here. As the water warms a little bit, I'm talking about your 50, 55, I mean, just upper 50s, around there. You can start throwing some swim baits, you know, some hardcore swim baits. You're gonna swim them all the way back to the boat. You don't really yo-yo these too much. You can, but there's not much effect there when you yo-yo these. Just a full blown out swim bait like this, or you can get a kind of a more buoyant swim bait or a hard-bodied swim bait like this that, you know, you can work this one pretty quick back in. But one thing, if this doesn't work for you and you're struggling to pick up fish, you might be fishing them too fast. That's always one thing to take into account, is slow it down a little bit. Speed it up a little bit, depending on if you're catching a bunch slow and maybe you're like, or you're catching a few slow here and there, speed it up a little bit, because in return that lets you cover more water. But if you start catching less fish that way, slow it back down. You're trying to maximize covering the most water, because that's, you can cover more of the lake, and finding fish at the same, or catching fish at the same time. So it's really a balance that you kind of have to, it depends on a lot of factors, but hopefully I've noted a few. But if the faster retrieve isn't working for you, go with something like a jerk bait, or a soft plastic jerk bait, which is what I like to call them, a fluke, whatever you want to call them. So I like this one in clear water. It's just a Zoom Fluke, baby bass colored. Nothing special about this bait. You just Texas rig it weightless most of the time. You can throw it on a drop shot or something like that, depending on, but then that kind of goes back towards the slower fishing. Like you can call them a drop shot, or I call them a drag shot. I've heard a few people references that. A drag shot is basically when you're casting it out and you're dragging that drop shot weight back in with this on it and twitching it. A drop shot is, in the name, you drop it straight down. Well, when you cast it, I don't know, they call it a cast shot. Some people do. Yeah, so clear water, I'd go with this one. And then if the water's a little darker, you might want to go with a little darker of a fluke. That one's a little bit darker. This is Houdini, this is baby bass. I love these two. They're not much difference, but there's a little bit there. Alright, so, and then if you're into these last two topics are kind of, you know, if you're into them, go for it. But you got large jerk baits, hard bodied jerk baits. So in theory, these and these basically do similar actions in the water. They just kind of glide one way until you jerk it again, it glides the other way. So these are kind of expensive. You know, they can be. There is some cheaper models like these, were both $20-something a piece. Not terrible. The advantage of these are they look more realistic. Some of them have rattles integrated into them, so that helps. But you can't fish them in like heavier or places with a lot of cover, because they have two big treble hooks hanging off of them. But sometimes that's, you know, if you have the open water and you can work these around the limbs or stumps, whatever you're working, you know, you have obviously a better hookup ratio, or, you know, chance to get the fish in the boat, compared to these where you're just, you know, running a Texas rig and, you know, you might miss a few fish. You're less likely to miss fish like with these, but they're, like I said, there's more constraints on to where you can fish these. This is another one that's good as well. That's a hard body jerk bait, or you know, I call them glide baits. I don't really know all these terms that everybody throws on them, but it's just a big swim bait that basically when you twitch it, it glides one way, and then when you twitch it, it glides back the other way. Really cool action. I mean, that one is supposed to look like a shad. I think Savage Gear. Yeah, this is Savage Gear. Yeah, Savage Gear did a good job on that. That's a really good replica of a shad. But yeah, I hope this helped. This is kind of progression, so I'll recap a few things real quick. You know, as you move up, kind of increase your retrieve speed. You know, one of my favorite times of the year is when I can get away with start throwing a spinnerbait. You can cover a lot of bodies of water with these, and you can fish them in heavy cover. There's really not, when the water temperature allows you to fish a spinnerbait or a squarebill crankbait, go ahead and tie one on and start chunking them. It's now I love jig fishing in the winter. It's really, jig fishing in the winter is like, you know, everybody knows that's the way to go, but you know, that can be slow, very not what's the right word for it? Not very glamorous fishing. You know, it's almost you're just sitting there disciplining yourself the whole time, like, all right, I gotta fish this super slow, or at least for me, that's how it is, because I like to fish fast. I like to, you know, make a lot of casts, cover a lot of water. So when I can get to some of these baits, I'm real excited. And when I can get to some of these baits that, you know, when those fish move up a little bit shallower, because these aren't gonna go real deep and give you the right action that you need. So when the fish start moving up, these are pretty effective. Certainly if you're fishing like vegetated edges and stuff like that, and you know, if there's vegetated edges yet or structure, these are super effective around that. But you can fish everything. Every one of these baits really can be effective. It depends on how fast you retrieve it, and I can't stress that enough. I've probably said that 100 times. You really have to figure out the balance of how much water can I cover while not fishing too fast. Therefore, fish are still too lethargic to chase that bait. But you have to find that balance, and I hope this helps. Other things to note on, just on this channel in general. Oh, my light just went off. Yeah, great. Alright guys, so I don't know how, but I forgot one of my favorite lures, and I did not mention it. I don't know why. I even made a little list here, but I'm going to throw it in here real quick and tell you where to kind of throw it into your sequence. But a lot of people this time of year love throwing a lipless crankbait. You know, it's a great bait because it's not really defined like some of these other baits by depth. You can, depending on your retrieve speed, how you stop and start it, you can target a lot of different areas compared to like Squarebills kind of max out at certain depths and things like that. But this thing is super effective. I can throw one of these around cover because, you know, it's ripping through there like this. The hooks are, you know, tucked up behind it, and you know, like I said, in murky water, these can put off a lot of water displacement / sound. So fish can track these down, find them real quick. The water temp was like 48, and I decided to throw one of these on because I wanted to cover some water in some transition areas, like I said. So like not your deep creek edges or deep creek channels, but not your big flats up towards the bank, but kind of that awkward water that, you know, this is really where you're going to find fish in this time of the year. So I threw one of these on and just started chunking it, and yo-yoing it is a good technique with these because you can, like I said, you can kind of fluctuate this between different water zones, or whatever you want to call them, water columns, and catch those suspended fish that are just hanging out on those ledges. So yeah, I hope this helped, and like I said, a few things to note on this channel that's coming up. Got a giveaway coming up soon. Depending on when I get this video edited, I'm right around 1,500 subs, and so I'm doing a 1,500 subscriber giveaway. So y'all be looking out for that, and I can't thank y'all enough for all the interaction and stuff y'all been posting on the page. And yeah, I hope this helped. You know, if you have any questions, or maybe I said something wrong, or you know, I love talking to y'all in the comments, so give me your opinions down there, give me your questions, concerns, all that good stuff. I'm down to talk about it. If I said something that, you know, maybe isn't, like, you know, a lot of these things are techniques that I've tried. There's no like book out there that just has a magical recipe for catching fish. So yeah, let's talk about it down in the comments. But until next video, thank y'all for watching, and that giveaway's coming soon, guys. Thank y'all. Peace.